What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for a slightly different type of video today. So, 2022 is over, and so I was looking through some of the sales numbers here for some of these cars, and of course the whole industry was down about 8% last year. So some car sales were down in general, but there's a lot of surprises that I noticed here in the car sales for the past year. Some stuff that shot up like crazy, other stuff that dropped off for unexpected reasons, and there's just a bunch of really fascinating things that I learned here going through these sales numbers, and just some stuff I thought you guys would be fascinated to find out as well. And I also want to give a huge thank you to Cameron Johansson, who actually suggested this as a video idea. And I love getting into these sales numbers. If you watch the weekly updates every week, I kind of comment on that every once in a while. But this is just a condensed list of everything in 2022 that was the most surprising stuff, in my opinion. And as far as all these numbers go, I am rounding them to the nearest 1,000 unit or to the nearest percentage whenever I talk about the units and the percentages here. But the most surprising thing, I think, for me for 2022 was that the Chevy Malibu was up 193% last year, going from 39,000 units sold in 2021 to 115,000 units sold. And that could be potentially, at least partially, because of rental sales. GM does a lot of that, and the Malibu is a prime rental car, so there could be some of that going on here. And we do know that rental fleets needed to replenish their supplies last year. So there could be some of that going on, but that is a big jump even for, rental car fleets. That's just a lot of Malibus sold there, and I'm sure Chevy is very happy they've kept the Malibu around while Ford has discontinued the Fusion and stuff. And so I'm just glad to see a sedan do really well here. But one of the other biggest surprises here of 2022 was that another sedan did very poorly, and it was very surprising. We know, again, sedan sales are dropping every year. They're getting less and less popular as everyone runs to pickup trucks and SUVs. But the brand new Honda Civic, which debuted about halfway through 2021, so everyone who is a diehard Honda Civic fan probably already got theirs in 2021. But, still a really fresh product in 2022. And yet in 2022, Honda Civic sales dropped 49%, going from, in 2021, it was 264,000 units sold, which again was a mix of the old and the new, down to just 134,000 units sold. Still a lot of cars, but that's 130,000 less Civics than the year before. And this isn't just because of the segment or sedans, because you look at, for example, the Corolla, which actually basically was flat for 2022. It didn't lose or gain, but they still sold 222,000, and that regained its crown as the top seller there. Again, could be some rental fleet stuff going on there potentially as well, but that's still a big margin. And, I don't think half of Corolla sales are rental fleets. So, it just shows that, the others here in the segment, had more resiliency, and the Civic was basically the freshest thing out there in 2022, and yet it dropped the hardest. Now, I did hear that Honda dealers were some of the worst as far as markups in 2022, so there may be some of that playing into this. Maybe no one could get a Civic for a decent price last year, and so it just really killed the sales of it. I don't know, but that was just a really big surprise. And other stuff, like, for example, the Kia Forte, which is pretty ancient at this point, that only dropped 14% last year and still sold 97,000 units. There were some others, though, that did drop, like the Nissan Sentra dropped 40%, the Jetta's down 38%, and Mazda 3 was down 34%. So there were some others that certainly struggled, but none as badly as the Civic. And again, the Civic was the freshest out of all of those. So pretty surprising there. Another fun fact about Honda is that they were down across the board with everything last year except the Ridgeline. The Honda Ridgeline, obviously they don't sell more Ridgelines than the other stuff, but the Ridgeline was the only Honda to grow in sales in 2022, going up by 3%. So good for the Ridgeline. A really great and underappreciated truck, by the way. But anyways, that was funny. Another fun little fact here, Honda related, is the Acura Integra. If you would have gone on the internet in 2022, everyone hated the Integra. The Integra is terrible, blah, blah, blah. I really liked it. I reviewed it, and I thought it was great. But everyone was like, oh, no one's going to buy an Integra. It's just a nicer Civic, even though that's what Integras always were. But anyway, they ended up selling 13,000 Integras in 2022. And to put that into perspective, 13,000 might not sound like a lot, but that's more than the Audi A3, and that's just 1,000 units less than Mercedes A-Class and CLA Class combined. So basically, it's outselling Mercedes and Audi, and the BMW is a little tricky because they blend 2 Series Grand Coupe in with the 2-door 2 Series, so that's kind of a hard one to discuss. But I'm just happy the Integra's doing well, and I've actually seen a decent amount of them running around, and I'm just glad though that it's just a nice reminder that sometimes the internet isn't an accurate reflection of reality, and if everyone hates something on the internet, doesn't mean that that's actually true with real buyers actually spending real money, and so. That's just one cool thing to find out here. But Acura didn't have as good of fortunes in the rest of their lineup here. The RDX was down 62%, and that's despite it getting a refresh last year as well. Refresh seems to have either hurt sales or not helped it at all because it is continuing to just plummet there, 62% down. The Acura TLX is also down 56%, and that also, I thought maybe, the Type S coming out halfway through 2021 there would kind of help give it some momentum again. It's, getting a little dated and it's going to be ready for a little bit of a refresh here, in a year or so, but still just surprised that it dropped that much. And again, that doesn't mean it's just because of the segment. You can't just write it off to that because, for example, the next one, the Cadillac CT5 here, that jumped by 68% last year. And last year wasn't the first year for the CT5 to be on sale. Now, it was the first year for the Blackwing, but they're not selling, thousands and thousands of Blackwings. So, I mean, this is really a nice improvement. And it actually shows that it's up 68%, which is huge. But that means it's selling better than the Audi A6 now, and it's also not far off of the BMW 5 Series. So, I mean, Cadillac has struggled in that segment for a long time. The CTS was fantastic. It struggled. CT5 is fantastic, and it has, struggled previously, but now I'm so happy to see that more and more people are jumping on the CT5 bandwagon here, and it's really, jumping up, well, at least in 2022. CT4 sales are also up a nice 28% too, which is great to see. Another fantastic, underappreciated car, in my opinion. Another huge surprise from Cadillac, in my opinion, is the Cadillac XT4 has jumped up 88%. And that's a luxury brand, so I don't really think there's any kind of rental fleet stuff going on with that one. So I don't know why it's up 88%. I like the XT4. I enjoyed it whenever I reviewed it a few years ago, but there was nothing new, I don't think, in 2022. No reason for it to almost double in sales unless it was just the fact that maybe Cadillac dealers were willing to deal when other dealers weren't for other brands, or maybe there just was stock of XT4s laying around whenever the stock of everything else was very limited last year, so maybe people just went for XT4s because it was available and maybe it was available at a decent deal. I don't know, that's just a complete guess, but I can't come up with any other reason why XT4 sales almost doubled last year. Another one that's a head scratcher for me from GM is the GMC Terrain. Again, nothing really new there. I think it maybe had a little bit of a refresh not too long ago, but not something that's really in the headlines much or anything, but it was up 82% with 86,000 of these units sold. Again, it's not new, it's on a pretty dated setup, I think, at this point, and yet it's up 82%. Again, no idea. I don't think those are sold to rental fleets. Maybe some of them are, but I mean, still, I don't think that explains an 82% sales jump. So, bravo GM. They really had a fantastic year, it sounds like, even though, again, everything else was down. I mean, Silverado and stuff was down, a good bit. So it's not all good news for GM, but at least as far as some of the obscure stuff goes, a bunch of home runs here last year. Also, another little good bit of GM news here is the Camaro has finally started to gain a little bit of market share here. It's up almost 13%, and that was notable because the Mustang was down last year, and the Challenger continues to be the top seller in its segment these days, and outsold both. But it's just good to see that Camaro is also, growing. 13% is not huge, but considering, it's never sold very well, any kind of positivity towards the Camaro is great, in my opinion. It's a fantastic vehicle, also very underappreciated, I think, still, and some glad to see that is at least trending upward a little bit there. Another one, though, that's kind of surprising is the Chevy Colorado, which is basically in its final model year. We already have seen the new one that came out, towards the end of last year. We don't have them on sale yet. I think they're coming out here in the first quarter of this year. But anyway, Colorado sales were up 22% last year. So either people really didn't like the redesign, people didn't care, or they just were deals out there for them. I don't know. But just kind of surprised that a vehicle in the last year of its life is up 22%, but good for Chevy once again. Now, Chevy Suburban sales were down 40% last year, and gas was expensive last year, so I could certainly see the big gas guzzling stuff dropping. But the strange thing is the Suburban's down 40%, but the Tahoe is flat. The Tahoe did not drop or gain, but Tahoe sales were fine, but then you add an extra few inches to the length of the vehicle, and then all of a sudden no one wants them, and they're down 40%. Again, kind of strange. But those are the numbers there. Now there's a surprising one here is the Chrysler Pacifica, just out of the blue, is randomly up 32% for the year. Again, that could be some rental fleet influence possibly, but still just another, pretty old vehicle. Pacificas are great though. We did, see that they added the all-wheel drive and a little bit of a refresh here towards the end of 2021. So that could have really bumped, 2022 sales a little bit, but I'm just impressed that it bumped them 32%. And so, good to see that, minivans still aren't dead. Another one that's surprising is the BMW X6, which is pretty dated at this point as well. Very expensive and all that, but it's up 42% in 2022 and it actually sells almost double as many units as the much cheaper entry-level BMW X1, which you would think that a lower price would mean more volume, but in BMW's case, that is not true. And the X6, for some reason, all of a sudden got a lot more appealing in 2022 and, outsold even the affordable stuff. Obviously, X3s and stuff still sell way more, but just impressed that the X6, has that kind of appeal still these days. Another one that's surprising is the Ford Edge. The Ford Edge, now, it didn't gain or lose. It was flat in 2022, which is impressive on its own just because, again, it's a very dated vehicle. I think that came out in like 2015. And doesn't really have much new. I think it got the big, huge touchscreen a couple of years ago, but that's it. Not super competitive in its segment anymore, but they still sell 85,000 of these things a year. That was the shocker for me. Not that it's really flat, but that just 85,000 people are still buying Ford Edges every year is surprising. And that is also notable and kind of a commendable thing for Ford because like the Nissan Murano, which also competes in that space, was down 35% last year. So it doesn't mean that, people just want that segment and they'll take anything old. They deliberately skip over Muranos, but they are still buying Ford Edges very well. And so kind of impressive, the staying power there of the Ford Edge. But another thing that's pretty impressive and really is, I think they kind of take the crown for last year as far as sales growth here, is Tesla. They had huge growth in 2022, and it's also very shocking considering all their vehicles are also very dated at this point. And, also, again, there are supply issues and all that, and still, the Model S jumped 683% last year from 11,500 units roughly to 90,500 units. And remember, the refresh for the Model S was in 2021, not 2022. The Plaid and all that exciting stuff came out in 2021. So, all those early adopters of the brand new stuff already got theirs in 2021. So 2022, I don't know what happened. I think they just basically only raised prices all year, aside from the very end of the year here last year where they cut prices aggressively. But that's not going to explain, you can't, sell that many vehicles in the last month or so of the year. So, all year, they were just kicking butt at Tesla with the Model S. And again, it's one of those things, it's an old vehicle, it's a nice vehicle, but, it's just kind of surprising that, it's selling as well as it is, especially considering all last year they were forcing you to get them with the steering yoke as well. And people put up with that. And, tons of people, went into those and really, just insane that they're still selling that many Model S's, and that it jumped so much and reversed course so strongly. Same deal with the Model X, just a little less. But that also shot up 230% last year from just 7,000 units sold in 2021 to 24,000 units sold, and very impressive. The Model 3 also is up 61% to 196,000 units, and that's up from 122,000. So, selling, roughly 70,000 more Model 3s than the year before. Again, very impressive. Model Y also was up an impressive 40% from 162,500 to 226,000 units. So, there's tons and tons. And that's part of why, electric car sales really shot off last year. And obviously stuff like the Mach-E and others helped it. But, Tesla was really holding up the whole segment as far as the electric stuff goes with those massive sales gains that, again, on old vehicles, it just really defies convention and reasoning and logic. But for some reason, they still have a huge appeal, and that seemed like it flipped on like a light switch in 2022 and just really shot up and refreshed that, excitement for those Tesla products, apparently. So crazy to see that. Moving on to other brands here. Bronco. So the Ford Bronco, there's a lot of negativity around the launch. There was a bunch of issues and recalls, and no one could get vehicles. And the people who were able to get the vehicles were having to pay over sticker, and it was just a massive headache. But Bronco sales, now this is partially because of the production ramp up, but they're up 234% in 2022. Regardless of the percentage, which might be misleading, but they still ended up selling 117,000 Broncos last year. So, that's a lot of people that either paid markups or persevered and were able to find one at MSRP. But again, it kind of goes against the narrative that no one wants Broncos anymore. And, it's just like this overhyped thing. And, they totally ruined the launch. So I don't want a Bronco, and no one's buying Broncos because they totally screwed up the whole, debut of this new Bronco. But clearly they still sold over 100,000 of them. And, it still sold very strongly. Now, it still didn't outsell the Wrangler. The Wrangler, even though that, again, is a little bit dated. But obviously with Wranglers, no one really cares about that. But they still sold 181,000 Wranglers in 2022. So it's still the sales leader there. But it's impressive that between the Bronco and the Wrangler, about 300,000 people last year bought a rugged off-road vehicle that's pretty compromised on-road. Bronco's definitely, much better. But, it's just interesting that that many people went for these things, and that, the Bronco actually did sell better than I think myself and a lot of others probably realized last year. Also Maverick, Ford Maverick is another one, very hot, very hyped up vehicle, but everyone was like, I can't get one in MSRP, they're slow with the production, and it was a whole stressful thing on the Maverick forums and stuff, people being upset about not being able to get trucks and getting them having to pay over MSRP. But Maverick sales are up a huge amount as well, and again, that's partially because of the production ramp up once again. But it's just the fact that at the end of the day, they sold 74,000 Mavericks last year, which shows, that is a grand slam, not only from a hype and demand standpoint, but also how much they actually were able to actually sell these things. And the Santa Cruz also did pretty well for Hyundai. That sold 36,000 units, but clearly the Maverick is the winner. Maverick also starts a good bit cheaper than the Santa Cruz, so that is part of that, I think. But just very impressive they have sold that many, and so hopefully other car companies see those sales figures and want to jump into the fray and offer some affordable trucks once again, since that's something that's evaporating here with a full size segment. Another surprise here, really with Subaru this past year, the hierarchy really changed, and so Crosstrek was really the big sales leader. Subaru overall was down slightly, but the Crosstrek was up 22% to 155,000 units, and that's surprising on its own because the new Crosstrek is coming out this year. And maybe if you're not super into the weekly updates or you don't follow car news or Subaru news, you might not have known that, but it's still just an older product that everyone was familiar with. But again, I think Subaru buyers really don't care quite as much about having the newest, hottest thing. But it's just interesting that towards the end of its life here, it still is up 22%. And because it is up to 155,000 units sold last year, that has now overtaken the Outback and the Forester. So the Forester sold 155,000 units in 2021, but for 2022, it dropped 26% down to just 114,000 units sold. So Crosstrek is now the clear top dog there. The Outback's now down 5% to 147 units, so that now takes the number 2 spot there. But Crosstrek is now the number 1 seller for Subaru, which is really surprising because you'd think it'd be a Forester, but not the case. And so Yeah, interesting to hear that. Also, though, the last little bit of surprising Subaru news here is that the Legacy, another sedan that's surprising, at least me, is that the Legacy sales are flat. They didn't gain, but they didn't lose either. And for the sedan segment, that's notable, I think, considering a lot of the others still were down in that segment. And so the Legacy, though, is holding steady at about 23,000 units a year, but... just again, I'm glad to see that there is still, seems like those remnants that are hanging on to sedans are strong and, they're not giving up too much ground here. And so, people are still buying Legacies. Also, last little bit of Subaru news here, the BRZ, that is up 44%. Part of that is because, they launched it towards the end of 2021. So 2022 was the first full model year of sales for this brand new, version of the BRZ. And so, but up 44%, always good to see, sports cars, being up. And so it's up now, selling 3,345 units. So not a lot, but more than the 2,300 it sold in 2021. But the real surprise too, and I didn't really realize this, but the Toyota GR86 sells way more than the BRZ. I kind of thought it was the other way around. The GR86 did launch later than the BRZ, and the GR86 sales really didn't start until the beginning of 2022, but they still sold 12,000 units. And so even if you combine 2021 BRZ sales and 2022 BRZ sales, you're still coming out at, less than half the amount of sales sales of the GR86. So GR86 doubles the sales of the BRZ. And just, yeah, kind of surprised because I feel like there's more, at least online, there's more interest in the BRZ than there is in the GR86. But as far as sales numbers go, Toyota is the clear winner there with the GR86. So that was kind of surprising to me. Another surprise here from Toyota, from Lexus technically, is that the Lexus LX was down 86%, even though, there's this brand new one that came out last year, which was, pretty much improved in every way, as long as you're not someone who, really wanted a V8 engine. That was the one thing you gave up. But, I mean, it was improved in all the other ways. I still don't think it's a great vehicle. I had plenty of complaints in my LX review last year. But I'm just surprised that for a new version, it launched, by the way, in the first quarter of 2022. So they're, maybe they pulled some chips so that they limited supply of these deliberately. I don't know. There could be a backstory as far as the explanation for that one. But it went from selling 26,000 units for the old one in 2021 to selling just under 4,000 units here for a brand new version in 2022. So kind of a surprise there. Could be a backstory and an explanation, but just a surprise nonetheless. Another surprise here, Mercedes GLC, which is in its last model year here. They already revealed in Europe the new GLC that's coming out this year. And again, maybe if you're not super into car news and stuff, you don't know that, but still, it's an old vehicle at the end of its life cycle. I think it's about 6 years old at this point. It's up 26.5% in 2022, going from 52,000 units to 65,000 units. And so, just another one that kind of defies logic, but it seems like GLCs are getting more and more appealing to people as they age, so that's interesting. Also, the Nissan Altima is up 35%, which is, again, great news. Another, mid-sized family sedan that is gaining nicely, and so that's up to 140,000 units, up from 104. That could also be a mixture of, some rental sales as well, because Nissan Altimas are definitely plentiful in rental fleets, so it could be some of that too, because otherwise, there wasn't really anything new. The new refresh here for the Altima is coming here kind of for the 2023 model year, so I don't think there's too much of that, on sale last year. But, I'm just glad to see that Altima sales jumped up nicely too. And I think the Altima is a really nice vehicle for this new generation, and so I think it deserves it, and so I'm glad to see it's getting some love there. But surprisingly, even with, sky-high gas prices for much of last year, the Nissan Versa was down 78% from 61,000 units to 13,000 units, which is a huge drop. And just really surprising, because again, with all the inflation concerns and everything else, you'd think there'd be more people interested in affordable vehicles. Clearly, that's not the case, with the average transaction price rising last year to $46,000 by the end of 2022, which was crazy. And so I guess the Versa is just, one casualty of that, but just kind of surprised that it's a nice little vehicle. If you want something, I mean, it's one of the cheapest vehicles out there, but I think it's actually a really nice little car as long as you don't need a ton of power and a ton of space. I think they're really great, and so I'm a little bit sad to see that the Versa is selling so poorly here over 2022. Another surprise here, Porsche, the 718. I think there's a lot of hype, with the GT4s and the GT4 RSs, which obviously do sell in very small numbers, but even just with the GTS and the 4.0s and all that kind of stuff, I thought there was a lot of hype, and so I thought, therefore, that 718 sales would have grown last year. That's not the case. They're down 25%, and so they're just selling only 3,500 units roughly last year. Another interesting Porsche thing is that the Panamera, strangely, another old vehicle that I didn't think people really were that interested in anymore, but the Panamera is up 19%, and so still only sold 4,200 units, but that's also surprising because the Taycan, which is the hot new thing, that dropped 17% to just 7,300 units, so still selling a good bit more than the Panamera. But it's just interesting the direction, the Taycan's dropping off, and the Panamera, which doesn't have anything new, which is pretty stale, very nice car, obviously, but, just got a little stale, and it's actually growing. So that was another fun little surprise to discover there, and so maybe that's part of why we've been hearing rumors that Porsche is going to keep the Panamera around for another generation. Maybe they see some staying power here with the Panameras. But last two little interesting factoids here. First is that Kia sold more K5s than Hyundai sold Sonatas in 2022. By actually 14,000 units, Kia beat Hyundai by. I think part of that is the more polarizing looks of the Sonata, and the fact that the K5 I think looks really cool. So it could really just come down to styling, because I know internally it sounds like there's rumors that Hyundai is pretty upset about Sonata styling, kind of tanking sales, because Sonata used to sell really, really well, and it's really dropped off hard, even beyond, just the average, segment drop off. It's, Sonata's in a rough place, and so it's interesting to see the K5 sold better though, and now takes the crown over the Hyundai there. And then the last interesting thing I noticed is that Toyota still sold 121,000 4Runners in 2022. It's down 16% for 2022, but still 121,000 people bought a 4Runner. The 4Runners are great. I had one for a week last year actually, and it's one of those things that I think as it ages, its appeal actually gets stronger, because there's a lot of people who still clearly, over 100,000 people still want something old school. They don't care about having something brand new and fancy and high tech. They want something, tried and true and proven and solid. And that's what the 4Runner is. And so it's just impressive, though. I mean, Toyota really has mastered this. They did it with, a bunch of their vehicles, but the 4Runner is one of the prime examples of really, figuring out what people want and, honing in on that so well that these things have staying power, for decades. And it's just wild. And so got to take my hat off to Toyota there for figuring that out, and for just, still selling these things and having the guts to sell old cars, even though, it might seem dated, and journalists like myself might be like, oh, it's old, but it's, clearly the customers think otherwise. And it's another, area where, sometimes the internet or, what you're seeing out there in your reviews or whatever might not be accurate to reality. And the reality is that consumers love old stuff like the 4Runner, even if it's not, brand new and shiny. So anyway, but that's all of the most surprising car trends here that I noticed in 2022. Let me know what the most shocking thing was for you in the comments below. Thank you all very much for watching. Please also leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to keep these videos coming. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.